Hi there guys, I'm Nikhil from GreedyTech and this is the camera review of the Redmi Note 10. On the rear, this phone has a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel primary camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle camera, a 2 megapixel camera for taking macro shots and another 2 megapixel camera for taking portrait shots. For selfies, you get a 13 megapixel camera. Now these are some sample shots. Pictures from the rear camera have good exposure control and colors also look saturated. Dynamic range is great. There is aggressive sharpness going on, but overall they do look pretty good. Color temperature is slightly to the cooler side. Whether it's good or bad depends upon your personal preference. Now these are some pictures taken with a wide angle camera. Wide angle shots are followed by the regular shots. Exposure control, dynamic range are pretty good. Once again, colors are saturated, but the color temperature is slightly to the warmer side. Now these are some macro shots. Overall they look pretty good, has good color reproduction, but lacks sharpness. Now these are some portrait shots. Edge control is pretty good, color reproduction is good, dynamic range and exposure control are pretty well managed. When it comes to sharpness, it is slightly better than the regular shots. Next, we also have a dedicated 48MP mode on this phone. Even though this phone has a 48 megapixel camera, by default it takes 12 megapixel pictures by using a concept called pixel binning. So every time you take a picture, you get a 12 megapixel picture. If you want to get a 48 megapixel picture, then you need to use this mode. Now these are some selfies. Color reproduction is pretty accurate and the skin tones also look pretty good. There is a bit of aggressive post-processing going on, like skin smoothing. Well, it looks good, but once again this depends upon personal preference. Dynamic range and exposure control are also pretty good. Now these are some portrait selfies. Edge detection is nice. Sometimes it's not accurate, but overall you get a pretty good picture. Color reproduction is pretty good. Colors are slightly on the saturated side. Skin tones look good, and once again there is a bit of aggressive post-processing going on. Now these are some pictures taken in low lighting conditions with a primary 48 megapixel camera. Even in low lighting conditions, it does a pretty good job. Images are slightly to the softer side, but that's to be expected with any camera. Once again, colors are slightly to the cooler side. I guess this has to do with the camera itself. In complete darkness, if you take pictures with a flash, they look pretty good, colors are pretty accurate, and the sharpness is also pretty good. Now these are some pictures taken with the wide angle camera in low lighting conditions. All the pictures are slightly to the softer side, just like the primary camera, and color temperature is to the warmer side. Now this phone also has a dedicated night mode, and these are some sample shots. Overall images are much more brighter than the regular pictures, but they are still slightly to the softer side. In indoor lighting conditions, you do get much better looking pictures. Now these are some selfies taken in low lighting conditions. They look pretty decent. There is a bit of skin softening going on in few photos. Colors look slightly to the duller side. Overall, all the selfies look pretty good and usable. Now this is the sample video footage recorded using the rear camera at 1080p resolution at 30 fps. This phone offers electronic image stabilization, but it is slightly jittery. Exposure control and dynamic range are pretty good, and the color reproduction is also pretty accurate. Now this is a sample footage recorded with the wide angle camera. Even while we are shooting video with the wide angle camera, it has electronic image stabilization, but the footage is a bit shaky, and the colors are also a bit more saturated. Now this phone also has 4K video recording option, but the stabilization is pretty bad, so you get a shaky footage. With that said, exposure control and dynamic range are pretty good. Color reproduction is also pretty decent, with colors being on the slightly saturated side. If you can hold on to a single position without just moving around, you'll get a much more usable footage. So guys, this is a sample footage recorded using the Redmi Note 10 using its front-facing camera at 1080p resolution at 30 fps. By the way, audio is from the phone itself, so check out the noise cancellation and stabilization offered by the phone. Initial impressions, stabilization seems to be pretty good. Even the exposure control and dynamic range are very well managed. The footage is pretty stable, color reproduction is good, slightly on the saturated side, but once again pretty usable. Footage is pretty sharp and dynamic range is pretty good. So guys, to conclude, cameras on this phone are pretty good. They're definitely worth the price. They offer you a very well rounded package. So guys, what do you think about the camera performance of this phone? Do let me know by commenting below this video, and if you're planning to buy this phone, use the link in the description. It'll help our channel a lot. With that said, this is Nikhil signing off. See you in my next video.